On this episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, join me as I discuss the first ever political assassination in Australia. Shot in the dark, the death of John Newman, coming up right after this. Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans. I am your host, Belinda Brady, and welcome to my podcast, guys. Welcome aboard. For those regular listeners, welcome back, my beautiful true crime family. And to anyone who is new and listening to me, hello and welcome. A quick breakdown of what my podcast is about. I am a one-girl podcast. I research, I edit, I do all of it. I do it because I love it, and I hope you love it too. And I talk about true Aussie murders, true Australian murders while I'm drinking a coffee. I love coffee and I love talking about crime. Now, what I'm drinking today is my usual black coffee with mocha syrup. I'm getting a bit bored with the mocha. I like it, but I like, to change things around. So I do have some new syrups coming. So hopefully by next episode, I'll have a new one to tell you about. And of course, I love looking at where you guys are listening to me from. So rather than countries, I decided today I was going to break down what states or cities you guys are listening to me from. Not all of it, but some of it. So we've got people listening to me from Missouri. We've got people listening to me from Dubai, from Iowa, from Glasgow, from Florida, from South Holland, from Hampshire, from Edinburgh, Ohio, Arizona, and Galway. And of course, we've got Canterbury in New Zealand, Auckland, Victoria, Queensland, and Tower Hamlets. I don't even think I know where that is. I need to find out where that is. That sounds awesome. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. You're all absolute rock stars. Love seeing where you are listening to me from. And if you are enjoying these podcasts, you can subscribe. You can buy me a coffee. You can buy me a coffee membership for a year, which will keep me caffeinated and researching more podcasts to bring to your hot little ears. And if you do subscribe, you will get bonus ghost story episodes. If you think our criminals are evil, wait until you meet our ghosts. And I just want to start off this episode by saying that the crime I'm discussing, the murder I'm discussing, full disclosure, I have been sent a copy of a book that is about this murder. And I was asked to read it and possibly share my opinions on it, which I will do. But I want to make it very clear, if I did not enjoy this book, if I did not think it was something that I thought you guys would enjoy reading, I would not be talking about it. I'm not getting any payment for this. I was simply sent a book and asked to read it about a crime. And I was going to cover this crime eventually. And this book has been sent to me, and I will talk about that at the end of this episode. So full disclosure from my end, absolute full disclosure. And speaking of books, I have two books I'm going to flog real quick. I have a children's picture book about a nervous little green monster called Bolt, who is starting school. Bolt's First Day, available on Amazon. And I also have a collection of short spooky stories put together by the awesome guys at Nightmare Press called Murky Shadows, and that can also be found on Amazon next to Bolt's First Day. So if you're so inclined, please jump on there and have a look. All right, introductions aside, let's get stuck right into it. This episode I have titled Shot in the Dark, the Murder of John Newman. Sources are hosensot.com. I'm going to spell that HONISOIT, sydneycrimemuseum.com, parliamentnewsouthwales.gov.au, abd.anu 7news.com.au, trovenla.gov.au, and mugachinos.com. Now, I will also say in advance, I will be pronouncing some Vietnamese names in this episode. I do apologise if I get them wrong. Now, political assassinations are nothing new. I mean, just look at the US, look at Mexico, etc. It's something that almost every country on earth deals with. And when you are a public figure in office with an opinion about something, people are going to agree with you and people aren't going to agree with you. And then there are going to have people that you really, really piss off. It's part and parcel of the job. And you are open to criticism and hate and sometimes worse. But this kind of violence, this kind of targeted violence, was not something Australia experienced until 1994, when we experienced our very first political assassination, when a local parliamentary member, John Newman, was gunned down in his driveway. Now, his killer was quickly found, tried and sentenced to life in jail, but some think authorities got the wrong man. And when I say some, I mean a lot. A lot of people think the wrong man has been jailed. But before I go any further, let's go straight back to the beginning. Okay, so let's get started. Settle in, however you're listening to me, eating, drinking, settling down to sleep, sneaking me a little listen at work, gymming, get your coffee, whatever you're choosing to drink while we listen. And let's get stuck right into it. Shot in the dark, the murder of John Newman. Now, Australia in the 90s was at boiling point, especially in a New South Wales town called Cabramatta. Now, Cabramatta is a multicultural melting pot. And yes, I am very aware of how overused that term is, but it is really true in this case. There were all walks of life who called Cabramatta home, and things were about to come to a head. Now, Cabramatta was home to many a migrant and those who were generational Australians. Now, Cabramatta developed as an early 19th century farming village, which thrived post-World War II and became a migrant hub for Europeans, Italians, Greeks, and Yugoslavs looking to have a better life for themselves and their families. They were then joined by the Vietnamese community post-Vietnam War, who were also looking for a better life, and for the most part, everyone got on fine. Now, sure, there were some cultural differences and misunderstandings, but nothing unlike any other Australian suburb. Then the late 80s and early 90s hit, and Cabramatta changed. Gone were the migrants seeking safety and stability, and instead there was a rise in crime, street gangs, and a rampant heroin trade. It was so bad that the local railway line was nicknamed the Junkie Express because of the hundreds of people who would jump on a train from Central Station, get off at Cabramatta, get their hit, and then go back. Junkie Express. And at the top of it all was one of the most powerful gangs in the area, one of the most powerful and feared gangs, Vietnamese gangs, the 5T. Now, 5T had members who had arrived in Australia as unaccompanied refugee children. So they had no adult compass, they had no adult guidance with them. And though many ended up in financially stable and secure homes, they were attracted to the gang life. And one refugee, a boy called Tri Minh Tran, became the leader of 5T at the age of 13. He was also accused of, but not convicted of, murder that same year at 13 years old. The gang members lived in houses and units, and the 5Ts stood for Tin, which is love, Tien, which is money, Tu, which is prison, Tuai, which is die, and Toi, which is conviction. Together, these boys robbed terrified members of the Vietnamese community, and they were selling heroin. And like I said, Cabramatta was known as the Junkie Express, the local railway line. And at its peak, up to 1,000 addicts a day flooded Cabramatta to get their fix. Now, the 5T didn't mess around. They were vigilant and they didn't care who they hurt, and the community was terrified of them. So scared of this gang was the Vietnamese community that when the gang murdered a local member, like a local civilian, over 200 people refused to talk to the police about it because they were scared of retribution. They single-handedly wiped out all rival gangs in the area, and they ran the streets of Cabramatta. So these guys were bad news. And one politician in particular, a man by the name of John Newman, was very vocal about his disgust in the way his suburb was heading, and he didn't mince his words. He thought it was all of the Vietnamese refugees' fault and they should not be in the country. And this, of course, managed to ruffle more than a few feathers. Now, Newman was the target of death threats and had his car and property vandalised, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And he was also very outspoken about his political opponent, a man named Phuong Ngo, who had been born in Vietnam and migrated over to Australia. Phuong was born in South Vietnam to a wealthy family, and after the fall of Saigon and at the end of the Vietnam War, his family had their assets seized. And after trying to flee the country several times, Phuong landed in jail. In 1981, he made another attempt to flee the country. I believe this was his 13th. And he landed in Australia via Malaysia as a refugee. Now, Phuong was very passionate and a good talker, and he got involved with politics and rose through the ranks very quickly, where he was eventually elected to the Cabramatta ward of Fairfield City Council, making him the first Vietnamese-born Australian to enter local government. And he told the newspapers at the time, "I think we are welcome here, but we need a mutual understanding." Most people I talked to said we needed a Vietnamese on the council. So the Vietnamese community were feeling unrepresented, which would have helped Phuong get on that board. And of course, the government at the time would have seen the change in the people living in the area. And yeah, definitely, if you do have a high population of Vietnamese people, it makes sense to have a Vietnamese representation on your board. So he was dedicated. Phuong was dedicated to making sure the Vietnamese community had a voice. And he set up the Asia Press, helped in the redevelopment of the Mekong Club, which was a very popular club, very controversial club in the Cabramatta area. And he also served on the Ethnic Affairs Commission and was elected Deputy Mayor of Fairfield. So he was a popular guy, and he put his money where his mouth is. He wasn't afraid to go out and champion for his community. Now, he stood for election as an independent in the seat of Cabramatta in May 1991, but lost to John Newman. Now, Phuong was a likeable member of the Vietnamese community, and for the most part, he was considered one of John Newman's most outspoken and dangerous. And I don't say dangerous as in I'm going to hurt you, dangerous as in he could be a real threat politically, opponents. Now, remember the Mekong Club, because this does form part of this story. Now, before I go any deeper, we need to talk about who John Newman was. John Newman was born John Grinig, and I hope I have said that correctly, on the 8th of December 1946 in Austria, the son of John and Helen. After his father's death, his mother remarried and the family migrated to Australia in 1950, and they settled in Cabramatta when John was a small child. He changed his surname by default to Newman in 1972 and was very active with the Labor movement and the Australian Labor Party, which is one of the major political parties here in Australia. He was elected alderman on the Fairfield Council, and in 1986 he was elected deputy mayor. He loved karate. He absolutely loved it. He earned his 5th degree in black belt, and in 1978-79 he was the president of the Australian Karate Organisation. Now, John was the wearer of many hats, and by all reports he was proud of all of them. He was proud of everything he represented, everything he stood for. But he also had tragedy in his life. In 1979, his pregnant wife Mary and their 5-year-old son David was killed in a car accident. And by the time John passed away himself in 1994, he was a state member of parliament, which is a highly sought after role for any aspiring politician. Now, depending who you spoke to, you either loved or hated John. He apparently went through staff at an alarming rate, especially secretaries, due to his abrasiveness and his fieriness. But his colleagues spoke fondly of him for the most part, and he was one of the loudest voices in Cabramatta, especially when it came to immigration and especially when it came to Vietnamese immigration and the crime that could sometimes come along with it. Now, we know not all Vietnamese immigrants get involved with crime. We know that. And a lot of them ran their businesses and just wanted to get by without drawing the attention of the gangs roaming Cabramatta at the time. They just wanted to do what they had to do and get on with their life and not be bothered. But the 5T gang ruled the area with a knuckle duster clad fist, and John was over it. And he was also over the drugs in the area, which of course we believe, which the 5T gang had part of. Now, he helped campaign to combat organised crime gangs in the area. He was very loud, and in doing that, he drew attention to himself. He started to receive death threats. Threats he took seriously enough to get security cameras installed outside his home. Now, remember, guys, this was the 90s. We didn't have Ring Cam and all that stuff that we have now. But they were removed as the local police needed them elsewhere. So the police must have set up this security for him. And in 1993, John's Canley Heights office was shot at, leaving a bullet hole in the window, one that John would pose with later on for a local newspaper, and one window that he would refuse to get fixed because he wanted to send a message that he was not afraid. Now, do you guys remember the Mekong Club that I mentioned earlier? Well, John was absolutely certain that this club was a front for gang-related dealings, drugs, money laundering, etc., particularly the 5T gang, and he was almost certain his political opponent, Phuong, was part of it. And you bet he was going to sing like a canary about it. And around this time, there was a state election happening, and Phuong lost to Newman, apparently by a pretty decent vote, and Phuong wasn't too happy about it. I mean, of course he was. No one likes losing. No one wants to lose, something you've worked so hard for. And yeah, there was no love lost between the two. Now, by September 1994, John was still getting death threats. He had his property vandalised, and same with his car. And he had clearly pissed someone off, but that still didn't stop him on his crusade against gang violence and his certainty that Phuong was involved with illegal activities in the Mekong Club. The heat was still on John because of his outspokenness about the Mekong Club and the 5T gang. And he was still adamant that his political opponent, Phuong, had something to do with criminal activity. So things were reaching absolute boiling point. And he was still getting death threats. He was still having his property vandalized. So he had clearly pissed somebody off. And by the time September 1994 rolled around, things came to a very violent and bloody head. Now, John was engaged to a lovely young lady called Zai Jing Wang, also known as Lucy, and I do hope I have pronounced that properly. And she was a Chinese-born interpreter. And they lived together, and by all reports, they were very happy. Now, on the night of the 5th of September 1994, at around 9:30 p.m., John had returned to the couple's Woods Avenue Cabramatta home, and Lucy greeted him at the front door as she always did. Now, John called for Lucy to help him cover the car with a cover due to the recent vandalism on it, like the attacks that the car had had. And Lucy went around to the boot of the car to help him, like I guess to pull a tarp out of the boot. There, through the corner of her eye, she saw a hooded man in an army-style jacket emerge from the darkness with a gun, point it at John and fire it 4 times. The shooter then jumped into a waiting car that was running, and they fled into the night. John staggered, he stumbled, and he slumped to the ground on his house steps. A terrified, traumatized Lucy weeping over his body, who ran into her home to call the police before going back to comfort her dying fiancé. And despite the best efforts of the ambulance officers, who were called by not only Lucy but their shocked neighbours who heard the gunshots, he could not be revived. John Newman was only 47 when he died. Now, naturally, this assassination was front page news the next day. It was everywhere. This was Australia's first ever political assassination. Well, the first documented one anyway, and the public wanted blood. And very quickly, eyes turned on the 5T gang and its leader, Tri Minh Tran, and he became the prime suspect. But eyes also shifted on Phuong Ngo and his close ties to Tri and the 5T gang and the Mekong Club, which all hung out together apparently, all of which Newman was very, very vocal about. Now, Tree was apparently approached by a strong man who was looking for someone to kill Newman, but Tree refused the hit as it was too dangerous. And word on the street was that this hit was organised by Phuong. Now, this has neither been confirmed nor denied. And Phuong was brought in for questioning and initially refused to have a lawyer present, saying, "I am innocent. Why would I not help the police?" Which, if anyone who was innocent, would naturally think. But he would soon learn he would need one. Phuong told police on the night of the murder he left the Mekong Club and went back to his office, and then he returned home, but he lied. Police managed to pull his car phone records and had tracked his phone calls. Remember, 90s, we didn't have mobile phones. Car phones were what you had if you were important or you could afford it. So they weren't that common. And they tracked his phone calls, some of which had been made several kilometres outside of Cabramatta, where he said he was. And he also lied about driving to a nearby suburb of Liverpool to drop off some paperwork. So his story, he did tell lies. He did tell lies. And meanwhile, John Newman was given a state funeral, and his grieving widow was rushed to the hospital in the days after, having suffered but surviving an overdose. Now, days turned to months and months turned to years, but the gossip and innuendo among the communities was rife. Didn't go away. And the gossip was that Phuong had everything to do with the assassination, everything to do with it. And by February 1998, a coronial inquest into John's death would see Phuong named as the prime suspect. Now, by this stage, 5T leader Tree had been shot dead. He actually died in 1995. So if he wanted to clear his name and dob in maybe an accomplice, he couldn't because he was dead. And he was killed by fellow gang members because he broke the legs of a lieutenant. Yeah, these guys didn't muck around. So on the 13th of March 1998, Phuong community worker Phuong Ngo and Mekong Club employee Tony Dong, that's not his real name, were arrested and charged with the murder of John Newman, although the community worker and Mekong Club employee were quickly dismissed of any involvement after. But unfortunately for Phuong, he did not have that same fate. He was denied bail, and his Australian Labor Party members, who were very friendly with him initially, very quickly turned their backs on him. They washed their hands. They wanted nothing to do with it. Phuong insisted his innocence, stating murder went against his beliefs as a Christian and he would never kill anybody. Now, the theory was that the reason why Phuong got Newman killed was because he wanted his seat. Pretty much, that's the reason why. He wanted Newman's seat, so in order to do so, he turned to a lieutenant in the Mekong Club for help. Now, he apparently got several people involved, and apparently a call for a hitman was put out. You know, the search for a hitman went to several different suburbs like Wollongong and Kingsford and Botany, and eventually that word got back to the police that Phuong was putting out a hit on Newman, or had put out a hit on Newman. Now, apparently Phuong also acquired some weapons while he was making inquiries on someone who could take out Newman. And these weapons consisted of a sawn-off .22 caliber rifle, a .32 Beretta, a .45 Colt, and a Ruger. Now, he apparently used the Mekong Club to store these weapons, and it was then alleged that he got 3 of his Mekong employees to do the hit, 2 to shoot, and 1 to act as a driver. Now, apparently one attempt was at the Tien Hong restaurant in Cabramatta was when Phuong was supposed to signal by using a mobile phone that Newman was leaving, and another one was an attempt at Newman's home. Now, there were apparently at least 3 planned venues: Newman's office, the Fairfield Council Chambers, and the Greyhound Club at Yagoona. And all these places were frequented by Newman. Another one of the proposed hitmen left the team of 3, and another Mekong Club employee allegedly replaced him. So police alleged that Phuong had used his ties in the Mekong Club to not only source weapons, but to source a hitman and to help scout out locations where this hit on Newman could take place. And then apparently after Newman was shot to death in his driveway by this hired assassin, Phuong apparently met this hitman at a pre-organised place so he could dispose of the murder weapon. That is the allegations against him. That is what the police allege, and they also back that up by him lying about his whereabouts that night, lies that his phone records eventually outed him for. So he was arrested. The other 2 were let off, and it was messy. It was a messy trial. The first committal hearing took place in 1999, and was aborted for legal reasons. The second trial was held a year later in 2000 and resulted in a hung jury. And a third and final trial was held in 2001, and Phuong was finally convicted of the murder of John Newman and sentenced to life in jail without the possibility of parole. And like I said before, the supposed reason that he decided to take a hit to kill Newman to gain his seat of Cabramatta. Now, Phuong was eventually jailed in a minimum security jail where he was able to use a rice cooker to cook himself some meals and engaged with his fellow prisoners. But he was very quickly transferred to Supermax at Goulburn, where notorious killers and rapists call home, following the interception of apparent plans to hatch an escape plan with a prison gang called W2K, which stands for Willing to Kill. So he was apparently planning to hatch some kind of escape plan with these guys, kind of like his own Shawshank Redemption, I guess. He appealed his sentence in 2003, but failed. He failed again in 2014 and failed. Now, he is classed as high risk and has limited contact with the outside world. He can watch TV, receive letters, and read books, but that is about it. And as it stands, Phuong Ngo is still in jail and has still been charged and convicted of the murder of John Newman, and he will most likely die in jail. Now, most of Australia bought his conviction and sentence, and many don't. Now, I was a teenager when all this went down, so it didn't really, it wasn't really in my day-to-day. I do remember seeing it on the news, but I, like many Australians, think, okay, they've got the right person, the police have evidence, we don't just go putting innocent people into jail. But there are plenty of us who do think differently, and after you do a bit of reading on this, you kind of think, wow, did he really have anything to do with this? So there are plenty of people today who are adamant, like Phuong himself, that he is innocent. He still says he's innocent. And many have started petitions and websites saying he has been wrongfully convicted and his case needs to be looked at again. And he has a close ally and a fierce defender in the author of the book I'm now going to talk about. And the book in question is A Marked Man by Carlotta McIntosh. Now, Carlotta is an Australian journalist and spent over 2 decades working for high-profile and local newspapers in Australia. Now, Carlotta was working for a local newspaper at the time of the Newman assassination and attended all court hearings. And over the course of this, she became convinced that Phuong was innocent. She has also become very close to Phuong, where the two exchange letters and they keep in contact. And she has even travelled to Vietnam to visit his hometown to see where he grew up and to meet his parents. She has taken a personal and professional interest in this murder and in what she believes is the jailing of an innocent man. And she gives a personal yet factual insight into the climate and the opinions at the time of Newman's murder and offers straight up facts as to why Phuong is innocent. I mean, he was the easy suspect, wasn't he? He was the man that anyone would have gone, had to be you. Newman was outspoken about Vietnamese refugees. One of his biggest political opponents was a Vietnamese refugee. It's not that hard to turn around and point the finger and go, yeah, it was you. But did they get it wrong? Is the wrong man in jail? I mean, I, for one, I've had my opinion wavered since reading this book. Do I think Phuong Ngo murdered John Newman? I'm not so sure anymore. The way Carlotta has written this book, the the facts that she gives you and the beautiful simplicity of her writing, and that's not an insult, that isn't a compliment. You don't need to go over the same sentence trying to work out what she's trying to say. She makes for a compelling case. And if you are interested in learning more about the murder of John Newman and the case for and against Phuong, or if this case has piqued your interest in Australian political assassinations, then I definitely recommend Carlotta's book. Give it a read. It is a really fascinating insight into a really tragic murder in Australian political history. And again, I will disclose I have not been paid to promote this book. I have been given a copy to read, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it, so I highly recommend it. Have a read of the book, do some research, and let me know what you think. Do you think they've got the right man behind bars? Do you think Phuong Ngo killed John Newman or had part in his murder? I'd love to hear your opinions. I used to think so, and I'm not so sure anymore. So please let me know your thoughts. And if you are interested in reading Carlotta's book, you can Google it. It is called A Marked Man by Carlotta McIntosh, available wherever you read your favourite books. And if you are interested in finding out more about Phuong Ngo and his many supporters, just Google his name. There are so many websites up there and petitions going. You won't be hard pressed to find one. And that's it, guys. Thank you again for listening, and thank you again for being part of my true crime family. And as always, I love hearing your opinions. I love hearing your thoughts. Don't be shy. I won't bite, I promise. You can reach out to me on TikTok or YouTube. You can buy me a coffee. I'd love hearing from you all. Please, love to hear from you. So until next time, guys, thank you. Thank you again for your company. Stay safe, stay cool, stay caffeinated, and I will catch you all later.